Uh, my first my first question would be, do you actively inform yourself about the acts of gun violence that are common throughout Cleveland?
Yes, so I keep informed in a number of ways. First of all, anytime that there is a student involved issue, we have a program called Rapid Response that alerts me so that I can alert the board, and also provides supports for students, families, and people in the schools. I'm also a member of a program called STANCE, which is a program for a Safer Cleveland, Partnership for a Safer Cleveland, where I actively work with other community partners, including Chief Williams, the Justice Department, to try to develop interventions to curb the violence in Cleveland. So I'm both active in the incidents that happen, but also in trying to, address the larger challenge.
Thank you. My next question would be, does gun violence affect students in CMSD?
Oh, absolutely. There are things that there are traumas that students experience either directly or they experience indirectly because it's happening in their community and around them or with their friends. And we know, not only from psychological sciences where we perceive that it has an impact, but we actually know from neurological science that trauma actually impacts how brains function. So absolutely, it impacts our students, and because it's pervasive, it's not just the individual traumas, but it's the built-up trauma of the ongoing experiences that our students experience that take a toll on your ability to learn, take a toll on your ability to just feel safe and comfortable. So yes, it has wide effect on every student, I would say.
Do you have programs in place to prevent gun violence in CMSD, like after school programs or stuff like that?
There are some programs. I would say there's not a citywide impact program yet, and it's something I'm really pushing for the partnership that I talked about to work on. I actually have finally successfully gotten a grant to do some youth participatory action research, which I'm really excited about. I've been talking with the Stance Partnership about if we want to know how to stop this, we have to ask the people who have been involved. They know how they got involved. They know what happened, why it happened. And this has been done in a city in Florida, and I'm blanking on the name of it right now, Broward County, Florida, I believe, where researchers from a university actually partnered with youth who had experienced crime, and the youth became researchers. And so I'm really excited to be starting a youth participatory action research project where we can learn what is at the heart of this, what are the elements, and then we can develop programming that addresses those needs, because it's caused by something that's filling a need, right? It's not just random. People don't just wake up and say, oh, I guess I'll shoot somebody. There is a reason or set of reasons that we have to understand if we're going to actually change what's going on in our community.
I think that is a good way to go about solving the issue. But relating back to the what you said in your other response, can you explain what the STANCE program is?
Yep. So STANCE is part of a program called a Partnership for a Safer Cleveland, and it includes, like I said, Chief Williams from the Cleveland Police. It includes foundation support and leaders. It includes community agencies. It includes the justice system. And we work collaboratively to try to design programming to curb violence in general, but it has a particular point of view about youth violence. One of the things that I've had to challenge them on, and that I would actually challenge us to remember, is that CMSD is the school system for many of the youth in the community, but not all of the youth in the community. And often people think about gun violence and youth and attribute it to, well, they must be CMSD students. Well, that may not be true. We have to ask about, what about the students who are also attending community or charter schools? What about the youth that are also attending parochial schools? both from who is committing these crimes and youth violence and who is traumatized, like you mentioned earlier. It's not, you weren't traumatized because you go to Science and Medicine or Campus International. It's what's happening in our community. And so I've really been trying to use my leverage and voice to say, the school district should be part of the solution. But if you don't solve the bigger picture, we're not going to solve this problem. And so that's the kind of work we discuss at the stance. You had asked earlier about programming. I think, Stephen, you asked about that. One of the things that is coming out of stance is we are trying to create a 4th and 5th grade mentoring program, very much like True to You, only thinking more about mentoring about violence prevention, because we know that actually 4th and 5th grade is where we start seeing changes in behaviors that tend to lead either to a proactive healthy lifestyle or to a reactive not so healthy lifestyle, including crime. So that's a piece of work that also is coming out of the stance program.
Sorry, my bell just rang. But transportation is a big part of CMSD, and I was wondering if you think, or is it anyway, like the transportation is good, but you know, kids got to go everywhere to get home, ride the RTA. Maybe if we could better, like, do you think if we better the transportation, like have buses for everyone in CMSD instead of just riding the RTA, do you think that would help reduce the gun violence in within CMSD, or do you think it doesn't affect it at all?
I don't know that it doesn't affect it at all. What I would say is that the number of gun violence crimes that occur immediately after school, which would be more associated with transportation, is really a small amount. They do happen, but it's really a small amount of the challenge. It's really what's happening in the evenings, what's happening on the weekends, and particularly with our students that get reported to me, it's violent crimes that happened over the weekend, or it's violent crimes that happened very late at night when actually you all should be in bed, like I am. So do I think a different transportation strategy could help? Certainly, anything we could consider could improve, but do I think it's going to have a substantial impact? It doesn't appear to be a root cause. And so I would say that we're probably better at directing resources in other places.
Well, as you mentioned, it happens outside of school. So my next question would be, does seeing media about gun-related crime in Cleveland discourage kids for going to school, or does it encourage them to participate in gun violence in any type of way?
I think that's a great question for the youth action research, because I don't actually know. To your first part of the question, do I think it discourages school attendance? Sometimes I think it does. Although I'll tell you, I've been in Cleveland 15 years now, and when I first came to Cleveland, and I have a student advisory committee, the number one thing that students talked about was violence in school. That was their number one concern. And then a few years ago, it dropped to like number 2 and then number 3, and then it kind of fell off the list. Not because they weren't concerned about violence, but because they weren't concerned about violence in school. School has become an increasingly physically safe space. Now, what I do hear a lot from students now is about a social and emotionally safe space, mental health, things of that nature. But I do think there is concern, to Stephen's earlier question about safely coming to and going home from school, that may prevent attendance. I do think that community things that spill into schools may make me stay home, because I know that there was a big blow up in my community and I know those kids go to my school. So I think it does have some impact. As far as seeing violence in the media, provoking violence, there is research that says, exposure through, it used to be television, but now it's video games, it's television, it's social media, does influence behavior, but that behavior is influenced after there was already a disconnect from a proactive social setting. And so, I don't know either of you, but my presumption is that while you have seen this stuff and you probably play video games because your aides do, that didn't get you to say, oh, I'm going to go shoot somebody. And that's because there were other proactive social structures in your community. And that may be your school, your family, your friends, your church, your community center, could be however you've defined your community that you feel connected to. What we know, and like I said, we're going to get to do some really cool action research to learn, but what we already know is that gun violence and other youth crimes typically are youth that feel disconnected from their community. And so they feel like they've got nothing to lose. They feel like they found a new community, either in a gang, or they feel like since nobody knows who they are, they can get away with anything. Think about even, and you don't have to say it out loud, but we've all done it. Like what we'll do when people know us by name, and what we might try to get away with when we think they don't know who we are. Now magnify that, right, to an experience of that's how I feel all the time, is I feel like nobody knows who I am, and so I can get away with anything. I think that's the bigger issue. Then the media influence just makes it more socialized.
Mr. CEO, another question of mine is, since crime happens over the weekend and stuff like that as well, are these programs that you have in place, will they run through the weekend and the week, or just the week, or do you have different ideas for activities to do during the weekend?
Yeah, so the program that is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is our rapid response. And that's when we learn of a violent crime that affects our school community. And we activate school psychologists, school counselors, hospice for grieving, other social services. We run that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's actually a national model that other school systems have replicated. During COVID, for example, Las Vegas, Clark County, Las Vegas had a rash of suicides of their students, and just a series of tragedies. And they were overwhelmed at supporting. And so they actually, with our blessing, they actually diverted their phone calls to our rapid response team. And so like students and families in Las Vegas thought they were talking to somebody in Las Vegas. They actually were talking to somebody in Cleveland to help them out, right? So that we run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we run it through our safety and security at night and on weekends. The programming, like the 4th and 5th grade mentoring and stuff like that, that tends to be in school and out of school during the weekday. But one of the things that we're trying to do this year is, and you saw some examples of it last summer, is to try to do more kinds of ways to engage with students. So after school into the evening, weekend programming for winter break, so that, when you're on winter break, you can go participate in a band camp or an indoor sports camp instead of being left on your own with nothing to do, which is again where crime begins to happen. So you'll see this year us really working to expand where and how programming is available to you from the school district and our partners.
So my next question would be, what is CMSD doing to prevent gun violence?
Well, like I said, I think I've shared the basics of what we've been doing, and that's my work through the Stance Partnership. Our Chief of Police, Chief Hill, is also part of a network of the police chiefs with CMHA, RTA, and, Cleveland Police. They work together. They actually use a lot of social media intelligence to try to find out where things might be going on and try to get in front of them. And we participate as a district to the extent that we can provide information. I think though we have to do a lot more on the education side and the prevention side. And that's why this 4th and 5th programming that we're just starting to build is really important. But I also think that while we have to be part of a solution, this is one of those issues, like many others, the digital divide or food scarcity that school districts shouldn't be left to solve alone. So part of my job is to provide good programming, but part of my job is also to insist that the community takes the responsibility for the community's problems. You are not CMSD students, you are citizens of Cleveland. And Cleveland has a responsibility to you, of which part of that responsibility comes from your schools.
Other than the mentorship with the fourth and the fifth graders, do you plan on doing it with the high schoolers too, around like our age, 16, 17, 18 as well,
Well, I think
at some point?
the answer is probably yes, but a lot of that's going to come from what we learned from that action research about, when have students, kids made these decisions, and where is the best entry point to either prevent or to turn around. And that may be high school, and it may be early high school, 9th and 10th grade. It may be middle school, right? Even before you get to high school. So I really want to more deeply understand directly from youth, and directly from youth who actually have committed these crimes. When did you make these decisions, and why did you make these decisions? Because then we can be much smarter about providing the programming that's going to matter to the ones who are actually making these decisions.
You mentioned CMSD could do a better part in educating kids about gun violence. So my next question would be, should CMSD teach its kids to be aware of it?
Yeah, I think CMSD absolutely should teach our kids to be aware of it. And that, again, to Stephen's earlier question, I think we have to better understand what the decision points are that young people are making so that we can then use those understandings to educate about other options at the right points when we know you're making those, critical decisions.
You also mentioned it's also the responsibility of the community to see a decline in gun violence. So my next question would be, do parents have a role in lowering the amount of unnecessary violence in Cleveland?
Yeah, look, parents are always critical, right? So I'll say a couple things. First of all, I always start with the presumption that parents love their children and that they are doing the very best job they can for their children. There are too many people who convict our parents too quickly of being uncaring, unloving people, and I just don't believe that. I believe our parents are doing the very best they can. Having said that, young people should not be out on the streets at 3 a.m. And so when I get a call that we lost a young person at 3 a.m., I don't know what happened in that situation. I don't know if the kids snuck out. Kids do that, I don't know if it was that an overwhelmed parent with a now more independent middle school or high school student trusts that that student's doing the right thing when in fact that student needed more parenting. So I do think parents play a critical role. And I think that we can, one of the interventions, to Stephen, your earlier question, is maybe even more direct engagement with parents about, good strategies for gun violence prevention in your home, compared to maybe, you all getting hauled into the auditorium to get a lecture from the police about gun violence, right? Which we frequently do bad education strategies to educate on these things. So I think the parents can be really important, but I think that only is true if the people who are engaging with the parents believe, like I do, that these are good, good people who love their children and are doing the best they can, and therefore we can help them achieve their goal of loving their children the best they can. We can't do it if we think we've got to fix people. People aren't broken. And there's too many people out in the world and the community that particularly look at urban communities, communities in poverty, and communities of color as people we have to fix. That will never solve this problem.
I've recently had a lot of conversations with people about gun violence, and I've heard mixed reactions about it within CMSD. I've asked people, what could we do to help? And it's people out here, like grown-ups or kids, who feel as if it's nothing we could do, and no matter what we do or no matter how we try, it won't get through to the kids or it won't work. What will you do to convince the people who don't think that things like this won't work? What will you do to convince them that it will work? It will help prevent gun violence.
Well, I would use this example. I mean, you two are here as part of your blogging group to give voice to a problem that is affecting you as you and your peers. And, you are evidence that kids can be part of this, kids, young people can be part of the solution and should be part of the solution. And candidly, I bet that your blogs, as long as they actually reach your peers, will have more influence than if I hauled adults in to lecture, which is what adults always end up doing, talk to you about gun violence. I think the more that you can activate your peers, you'll demonstrate it. This is the kind of stuff that I want our young people doing all the time. I call this a demonstration of learning. You took on what I call a complex task that's worthy of your productive struggle. I want to figure out this complex task. You've researched it, you talked to people, you interviewed people, you're blogging people. That's where we get impact, is when it becomes something you're passionate about understanding and improving.
As a follow-up to my previous question, what steps do you recommend parents take to educate their kids about gun violence?
I think the first and most important always is talking with your kids. I think parents, so you'll know this someday when you become parents, but parents are pretty open and honest about not knowing what to do with an infant, their first infant, because they've never had an infant before. But they forget that they never had a 12-year-old before. They never had a 14-year-old before. They never had a 16-year-old before until that child turned 12, 14, 16, right? And so parents move away from just talking with their kids about what's important, what they value, making sure. And I'm guessing in some ways your parents have had conversations with you about keeping you safe, being aware of gun violence, making sure that you know their values, and that's part of that social connectiveness that I talked about earlier, that community. I think the other is that, again, I think parents of middle and high school students often trust that middle and high school student is independent enough to make good decisions on his or her own. And actually, I think parents should trust but verify. Young people do need opportunities to be trusted and demonstrate that. That's part of growing up as a youth and a young adolescent. But we also know that particularly middle school students, which again is where we see a lot of this starting to emerge in gun violence, are still impulsive. You may remember your middle school years when there were times you felt completely grown and there were times you felt like a little kid, right? And it hit like that. And so parents, need to, make sure that they communicate and set goals and expectations, but then also that they monitor, that they know what their kid is doing and where their kid is and keeping track of them. And then the third is, there shouldn't be access to guns. And there are a lot of homes in Cleveland where guns are in the home. They're not secured. My wife was a deputy sheriff, so she is trained to carry a weapon, and we don't even have a weapon in our home, even though she was literally employed to carry a weapon earlier in her life. So it's not for me to say that people shouldn't be allowed to have a gun in their home, but if you're going to have it in your home, there are safety standards. It needs to be in a lockbox. It needs to be unaccessible. And there's just far too many cases where, kids can just pick it up because it's sitting there. So those are three things I think parents can do. And I always ask myself, what are things that parents can do that is within their I already do it realm, right? So I'm not saying that parents should, go to the library and read about the very specifics of that, because that's outside of the realm of parenting. But talking with your kids, supervising your kids, keeping your home safe, those are things parents naturally want to do for their kids. And if we make explicit the importance of that, there are three pretty simple moves that could have a really powerful impact.
You keep referring to how when adults talk to the young people, like the police and stuff like that, it's always like we see it as a lecture and things like that. Do you think that maybe if instead of always having adults or the grown folks speaking to the youth, if we sometimes we could have youth speak to youth about gun violence, and do you think that would make a huge difference?
Yes, but even then, it has to be done in a way that your peers engage, right? And so I bet you have experienced times where there's been a youth panel, but it was moderated by an adult. It wasn't interesting to you, even though it was your peers, and so it didn't. I call it stick. It wasn't sticky. So I think it's about again, I actually think your blog is a really great example of it. It's about when you control the narrative, when you control the message, when you all activated this and came to me. I didn't come to you and say, go tell your peers, right? I think that's the power of it. And I'm a big believer in student voice and student agency, and super excited about this. And we're hiring student ambassadors now, and I have my advisory committee. But I think even if it's youth talking to youth, if it's not done well, and if it's not done in a way that the youth who are having the conversation just immediately trust that it's real, that it's the real deal, even that isn't going to be effective. The thing that I think adults sometimes forget, and I tell teachers this all the time, is you all can smell the truth like that. And so almost from the moment it gets started, whether it's the real deal, or whether it's like, okay, this is going to be a snooze, I just got to get through it. And so you either check in or check out. And so I think adults can do it well. I don't think we often do, but I think we can. But so long answer, I guess. Yes, students can be super important, but only if you are activated in a way that your peers trust it.
In my personal opinion, as students start to get older, they start to make decisions based on, their greater sense of independence. So my next question would be, what steps do you recommend students take to reduce the amount of gun violence in our community?
So I think beyond the conversation we just had about talking with peers, I think it's about finding ways to make sure that other kids in your community are connected to positive experiences. And whether that's because you're able to befriend them, and you play pickup basketball together, or you go to the rec center together, or you join an out of school music program, or whatever it is. But we know that connectivity matters, and we know that a lot of the young people that are involved in violent crime, they are connected, but they're connected to others who are also involved in violent crime, and they're not often connected in the pro-social space, and in fact often feel very isolated from it, don't feel welcomed in it. And so I think one of the things that students could do is really think about, how do we in our school make sure that the entire school community is fully engaged. I would suspect that young people your age have a good sense of who is more likely to end up involved in gun violence and violent crimes, and who is less likely. And you know that because you know how they experience your community, how they experience your school. And you know how it is different than the way you're experiencing your community and your school. So I think the more that you can bring people into the environment that is healthier, that's something that students can do that would have a positive impact. The trick, again, and I said this earlier, is again, or have a deep suspicion about who these people likely are, but you may also be at an age where you're not going to get them back. And so it might be about, how do we think about high schoolers, for example, working with middle school students who you can also already see the pattern, but maybe you can still get them to go to the Boys and Girls Club with you, or that you can, so some near peer mentoring could have some really important impact, I believe.
From a school standpoint, sometimes when kids come to school and stuff, they get in trouble because they're having a rough day or a tough day. And it's a lot of stuff that's going on at home that a lot of people don't know about. Instead of like, how do we handle issues like that? Like they come into school and they're like upset, and then like it might stem, and it's from home or from wherever, and they can't focus. Like, do you recommend like we have more like before school time with psychologists, after school with psychologists? Because I know from experience, it's this one kid I knew who came to school and he was having some trouble with some people in his neighborhood, and he couldn't focus all day, and then he got in trouble, and it was just a really bad time for him. So how do we handle situations like that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I think we can and should do. So first of all, we are implementing in 22 schools this year, and then we'll be building it out, the whole system, over the next couple of years, restorative practices training for all of our educators. So restorative practices is designed to dramatically reduce the out of classroom or out of school, placement because of behavior. And it's designed with the notion that Stephen is not the issue. Stephen's behavior is the issue. So let's address Stephen's behavior, not Stephen, right? So it's things like restorative circles, mediations, things like that. Okay, I had this bad experience. Here's what's sat behind it, and here's how I'm going to remedy it, right? And so what we're working with the International Institute for Restorative Practices. So we went with the Gold Star, and it's a year-long training program. And so we have to train in chunks because we can't do the whole city at once. But we'll have 22 schools that'll be fully investing in restorative practices this year, and then we'll build out to the whole system. And then we put in a student support team that is made of teachers and administrators that will watch the data at schools so that we can say, okay, we've got to go back to that school and provide more support for that school, because we're still seeing a lot of out of school time placements. We also are rolling out our Say Yes to Education program and the family support specialist. And one of the roles of the family support specialist is, if there is that problem at home, that person can access the United Way's 211 database and find a counselor for that young person, or find a mental health professional for that young person. And this year we're rolling out a full-time nurse in every building, and the nurse is going to be working with a pilot in 4 schools where we will be working to bring integrated health partners in. So more services from a beach, Applewood or Beachbrook, or along with physical health services like a Metro Health or a Care Alliance or what have you. And even that nurse, even though that nurse is trained, you think of a nurse as a physical health person, they have training to provide for basic mental health too. So having a full-time nurse is even another resource that would be available. And then we have to continue to activate the planning centers for what they were intended, which was a intervention space, not a discipline space. So it is a removal from class when you need to be calm and down, but there's supposed to be a intentional calm down space. There's supposed to be okay, now what happened and what choice might you have made the next time? So there is resources and more coming that should provide a lot of in-school care and support for our kids.
Throughout the interview, you mentioned a variety of programs CMSD is implementing and has implemented to reduce the gun violence. But my last question would be, what resources do you think are needed to make sure that these programs are a success and that they have a great impact?
So this is a place I've been advocating a lot. And so it costs $110,000 a year to incarcerate a juvenile. $110,000 a year. I get $11,000 a year to educate you. So it costs 10 times as much to keep one child in jail as it does as the money I have to support you. So what we have to do is, as we reduce these numbers, we have to get that money that is being spent. So it's there, it's real money. And we have to get it out of the justice pipeline and into the prevention pipeline. Imagine what we could do if I could have $110,000 just to give to your school for a program from your school. And that's just by intervening with one child. If we intervene with 100 children, if we reduce juvenile crime by just 100 children and get the money, I could give $110,000 to every school in the district. So for me, it is a financial resource investment. It will pay off huge as an economic driver when we are not spending all this money to keep kids in jail. And the issue is, in bureaucracies, people don't want to give up their budget, right? So whether they have 10 kids or 100 kids, they want their money. And what we've got to do is redesign the system to put the money where it's going to have the positive impact, instead of spending the huge amount of money we have after the problem occurred.
I would just like to say thank you so much for coming on here and for discussing this with us. And I'm grateful that you're like taking this very serious, and you have a lot of things that are coming. You have a lot of new projects, you have a lot of things you're working on, a lot of investments. And I just want to say thank you so much for helping to save the youth, because like they say, the youth is our future. And I feel as if us youth, if we don't start stepping up, if we don't start asking questions, trying to come to solutions with the grown-ups, the solution will never be solved. So I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for you to come out of your busy schedule, your busy day, to spend time with us today.
Oh, thank you guys. This is going to be the best part of my day, and it's only the morning, but I can already guarantee that.